This is Roll Call for this edition of African Drums. The African drums are sounding.
Good evening. Welcome to African Drums, the television organ of the Cuffy 250 Committee, an organization dedicated to the empowerment of the African Guyanese community through education and the encouragement of self-activity. I am Elsie and I'll be your host for this evening's program. As Cuffy 250 prepares to host its third annual State of African Guyanese Forum, African Drums turns its attention to the articulation of an African Guyanese agenda. On today's program, we turn our attention to the state of education in the African Guyanese community. What are the particular problems among African Guyanese? What are some of the causes? What can be done to arrest the situation? These and other questions I will put to our panel of educators. Mr. David Hinds is an educator, Cuffy 250 member, and political activist. Mr. Deon Abrams is a school teacher and community activist. And Miss Delicia Vancooten is a young school teacher from the west coast of Demerara. Gentlemen and lady, welcome to African Drums.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll start with you, David. Why is education important to the life of a country? Can you make the linkage between education and the political economy?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's an apt question to start with, Elsie. Education is the lifeblood of an economy, especially an economy such as ours, small society, new society, just coming out of independence, post-plantation society. And so therefore, it's the kind of economy that does not have the wide economic base as, let's say, the developed countries, the United States, and others. And so therefore, if we're talking about the development, we have to talk about development within the context of the skills we have at our disposal. In particular, our intellectual skills, which we can then turn into other forms of capital. So education becomes the basis for everything. I mean, it's the basis for, like I said, the skills that we need for development. It's the basis for upward mobility of poor people and so forth. Now, the linkage between education and the political economy of the country, it's profound. In the sense that you need education in order to propel the economy. So you need skilled people. You need education in order to run the economy, to run the country. That leaders have to be well schooled, well educated in what's happening in the rest of the world. International relations become important. They need skills about how to manage an economy and so forth. So education is important to governance. Right? Education, as I said, is important to producing the skills to make the economy run. And education is important to the upward mobility of people within the society. So really, in a sense, the country, cannot run without education. And it is what they call the knowledge base, a world that we live in. Education becomes even more important. And I'm talking about education both in the formal sense, school education, but also in the informal sense, because often we have people who are grounded in formal education, but really doesn't have the kind of larger context in which to locate that formal education. So the informal community kind of education becomes important. Again, when you look at a society like Guyana, when you look at a society like Guyana and you look at the way in which education excellence has declined over the last 20 or 30 years, you see how that then affects other sectors in the society. It has a relationship to crime or lack of crime. It has a relationship to the quality of policemen. It has a relationship to the quality of teachers you have in the school. It has a relationship to the quality of nurses, and so on and so forth. So the decline of education will really spell the decline of a society. And so the improvement of education, raising the education level, really has an overall effect on the society itself.
Okay, thank you, David. Let's look at another aspect of education in the society. Delicia, in addition to being a school teacher, you're also a young person.
Yes.
Can you speak to the linkage between education and youth empowerment?
Well, to expound on what Mr. Hinds said, first of all, let us look at education. What is education? Education is the process of having good reasoning and good judgment. Within our society, we have young people who, for some reason, dropped out of school, and they're in the society. And these are persons who we would deem as functionally illiterate. Sad to say, they're in our society and they're functioning, but they cannot reason, they cannot write, they cannot compute basic skills in our society. Now, how can we empower them, or why the empowerment would lack from these individuals? First of all, the functionally illiterate, like I said, they are individuals who cannot compute. It's hard for them to comprehend certain things. I'll give you an instance. We have a young person, for some reason they dropped out of school and they so happen to get a job as a cleaner. They go into the storeroom and they notice there are different cleaning supplies within there. Their employer told them, okay, I think I need you to clean this area. They are embarrassed or intimidated to ask that employer which of the cleaning supplies to use for the floor. So that individual takes it upon themselves to pick up a cleaning supply, which they don't know. Remember, they cannot read, they're just functioning there. They pick up that cleaning supply, which it's the wrong one. But they only know that after returning, noticing that the floor was cleaned with the wrong cleaning supply. So education is very vital and very important in society, because we don't want persons like that in our society. We already have them and we're trying to eradicate that. And how to do that? It's by having our young children remain in school, having our young children come to school regularly. Even though if your parents are not functioning or they're functional illiterate, you can change that. And that's why we're promoting children coming to school and becoming literate so that they can function better. After you're functioning better, now you can choose any career you want. For example, if you want to become a farmer, you would not just be a substantive farmer. You can be a farmer who will be equipped with the resources, equipped with the knowledge base, as to just move from substantive farming to being a global farmer. You can move onwards. Also, if you want to become, for example, entrepreneur, you will not just be a normal shopkeeper. You would be creative now in knowing how to go about to get access in certain resources and so forth. So to empower yourself is not just to say, okay, I'm educated, but it's to also do something about it. And that's why we need education and empowerment to go hand in hand with our youths, and that is what is lacking, and we need that to be improved.
Okay, thank you. I think that's the best explanation I've ever heard for education and youth empowerment. Deon, you were about to say something.
No, but education goes hand in hand with empowerment, as the sister just said, because if you're not educated, in many ways you're not really empowered. And in relation to your first question about the link between education and the economy, people who, remember when you choose people to govern, you are choosing people because you believe that they are able to manage on your behalf. If you have a company and you're going to put people to run that company, you're going to look for the best, the people who have the knowledge, the skills, the capability to move that company from where you're giving it to them to some level that is higher. It's the same thing with an economy, right? When you put a government in place, you're expecting that government to be able to take your economy from the level where it's at to a level that is beyond, so that eventually the benefits from good management can flow down to the people below. Now, if the people are not able to manage, they don't have the skills, they don't have the knowledge, they don't have the capability, your economy is going to suffer. And we have a perfect example of that here in Guyana, where we've had all kinds of people placed in positions who would have seen our economy been stagnated for years, and we've suffered from that. But apart from that, like Dr. Hinds said, the skill base and the people who have to on a daily basis engage in the activities to propel the economy forward, because it's not only the management at the top that is important. Management at every level of the economy is crucial, and we have to face daily complaints from the manufacturing sector, for example, about the fact that they want people to do work in certain areas of their businesses, but the lack of skills is something that they are very hamstrung. It is not enabling them to move their business forward in the way that they want to, because Guyana, because of the state of the economy, would have been losing a lot of its people who have the skills and the knowledge and the ability to do things. Countries that would have found themselves in situations like Guyana would have taken steps, either like Botswana, for instance, recruiting people from outside. Canada, the United States, those economies have been thriving on stealing the resources of countries like ours, because our economies have not been able to give them the kind of satisfaction that would have kept them here. So if you don't have the skill set, if you don't have the educational base for the people to drive the economy forward, then you're going to end up in situations where you will have high crime rate, you will have stagnation in development, you will have all the social ills that we complain about. All right, people using drugs, everything that is negative.
Okay.
All right, so
One of
it's
the things
crucial.
that people in the black communities are concerned about is social mobility. How do you get from poverty to a situation where you're comfortable? Can you make the linkage between education and social mobility?
Well, whenever you're going to talk about education, you have to look at a number of things, right? And social mobility, meaning moving from one level, possibly a level where you're poor, to one that is where you're comfortable, you're able to live. There is a direct connection between education and poverty, and we know that for a fact, that people who are better educated are better able to manage their economies. They are able to manage their own lives, they're able to earn more, they're able to take care of their families. All right, depending, even if you're living on the constraints of a society like Guyana, you're still able to at least live above the situation as if you were not educated at all. If you're not educated at all, then you simply have to be there scrunting at the bottom. You have to be doing menial jobs, which will not pay you adequately, and sometimes you don't have jobs at all, which means that you engage in activities that, like crime and that kind of thing, selling drugs, because you are fighting for survival. You can be easily influenced to do negative things, because a lot of our young people today, how they become involved in these activities is simply because somebody understands their condition, sees that they are in need, and they come to them with an offer. And that is why every day you see people going through the airport and they're caught with some kind of drugs, they're swallowing it, they're whatever means they're using to try to get it out. And that is because people understand their condition, that they're possibly uneducated, they're impoverished, they're so much in need that they are willing to do anything. They become vulnerable to the vultures who are out there. So if you are going to elevate yourself, then at least education is one of the avenues. It's a vital component, a vital avenue for social mobility within the society. If you're on a job, then you ought not to stay at the level that you're at. The way that you can elevate yourself is by improving the level of education that you've had. If you've started with possibly a first degree, you move on to a master's or you do a postgraduate something, and by that you're able to move upward. But if you stay at the same level that you are, then most likely you're going to be at the entry level position, and others will come after you because they're more qualified and they're going to be above you.
Okay, thank you. Let's talk about problems in the education system as a whole. As educators, you would know what problems exist within the system. Would you say that these problems are manifested differently across different ethnic lines? David, you can begin.
Yes, I think so. I do think, given the way in which our country is developed ethnically, in that our different ethnic groups live in their different spaces, all right, and even when they occupy the same village or the same community, for example, they tend to live in their compartments, right? And so therefore they experience a lot of the problems in the society differently. The problems, they have the same problems. I mean, poor Indian people and poor Amerindian people and poor African people experience poverty, but I would say they experience it differently. And so yes, the education ills that we have in the society, I'm sure we experience them differently in the different communities. Some communities, for example, have the means in order to have the means to deal with the education problems. Some communities don't have the means to deal with the education problems, and so therefore you find that the level of economic, the level of educational incompetence is higher in some communities than others. You find that there's some communities, parents are gone, you know, and so the children are left to fend for themselves. In some communities, you find the parents have to do certain kinds of jobs. So in the African Guyanese community, for example, you find a lot of parents, females, mothers, have to leave at nights and go do security jobs. It is not the same in, let's say, the Indian community, and so forth. So you find the experience is somewhat different based on the ethnic circumstances.
Okay.
To add to what Dr. Hinds said, as a teacher and as a young teacher, I was in the school system just recently. Experience would serve me that being African, indeed, it's different. Reason being, you grew up differently, we're cultured differently to other ethnic groups. African youths, we are more assertive, and that comes from the upbringing. When you're at home, and I can speak on behalf of other people, not just myself, you're more assertive. Like, if you want something, you have to speak up, and that was what is cultured in you. So now, take an individual who attends school. In a classroom, something occurs, that child would speak up. Now, a teacher of a different ethnic background might be offended by this child speaking up all the time, not knowing that is how the child was cultured, and might feel that child is being deviant, or as you would say, disgusting in the classroom. Now, keeping in mind, some teachers might be of the perception that this child is being deviant, and they would address you differently, taking into consideration probably the reaction of your parents, and for that reason they would say leave you in the corner alone. And children, that's probably their only way of venting out or acting out, or that's their normal. And because that teacher cannot relate to that child's normal, it would come over as a disrespectful manner, and that child might be penalized for that action, which is culturally brought up in them. So there is where we find the difference in a child acting in a way they think is right, and a teacher responding in a way which they feel is right. So we have that gap there. So to say that we do experience life differently, I would agree with that.
Okay, so we're seeing now that the differences across ethnic lines also affects the quality of education that children receive because of the cultural education of the educators.
Yes.
That's interesting, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute.
No, but the fact is, people who teach at, who are involved in teaching will tell you that there are problems across the racial divide, and every community has problems that are peculiar to it, and the African community will have its problems, the Indian community will have its problems. We should not take away from the fact that poverty does exist in all communities, and the situation of poverty is one of the major factors that would contribute to the difficulties that children face in school. For instance, people who teach in Indian communities will tell you that teachers, they relate experiences of a lot of abuse of young Indian girls and so on, sometimes even by their own parents and all of these things. In African communities, you may not find that. But what you find is that a lot of the children may go to school because the mother is the major provider. They go to school sometimes hungry. And so because the lack of having things to eat and so on, they come into conflict with other students within the system. What they do is try to, in some way, alleviate that hunger by maybe trying to take from others. For instance, you have a lot of instances where they may stand at the staircase and say to others, you have to pay a toll to pass. These kinds of things, but they're simply responding to the conditions that they're facing. The fact that they have gone to school, they may not have had breakfast, and they're trying to cope with their own situation. Now, these things affect how children respond to learning, because if a child is not comfortable, if he's hungry, he will not respond in a way that you would want him to in the classroom. And many times, we would sit and discuss that you have to get close to the children to understand the problems that they're going through. If you do not do that, then you will not understand sometimes why children are acting the way they are. And when they relate to you their experiences, then you sometimes have to be angry with yourself for the way that you have been responding to them. All right, so as teachers, you have to be able to not let what you perceive as right. Yes, you have to have standards, but don't let that be the measurement to make you respond to children in a harsh way. Try to understand the dynamics within them, the social conditions under which they exist. Research some more into their background, and you will see that the problems sometimes is not only because the child wants to be deviant.
Let me say something here, Elsie.
Sure.
One of the reasons that the African Guyanese community in decades past did very well in terms of education, it was because education was a collective responsibility. The community was responsible for your education. Often, I mean, my generation, our parents had, for the most part, in the villages, what they call a fifth standard education. They went to primary school, they didn't go beyond there. They couldn't always help us with the math and the English and so on and so forth. But the community took care of that. There was always, I mean, in the village that I grew up in, there was Brother U.C. Guyanese school where all villagers could go and get help with their schoolwork, what we call lessons and so forth. Teachers in those days gave extra lessons, not for money, but extra lessons to help those who were slow in class. And so it was a kind of supplement to what you were getting in school. And so the community took responsibility for the education. So, high school students would come back and help to teach the younger students. Deon Abrams here is an example of that. We had something in Boston called the Lessons Place. When the education system gotten bad, we got together and formed this Lessons Place where hundreds of children per day would come and get help with their work. And while the older students who were in high school, while they were waiting for their help in the evening, they would help with the primary school children. It was that kind of thing that you had in the African Guyanese community. And I think for some reason we have lost that the community has moved away from the kind of communal grounding to a more individualistic thing. All right? So that's where the lessons come in. If your parents can afford the lessons, then they send you to the best lessons, and it's often not in the village. It's often outside of the village. And so I think that that's one of the major problems we have in the African Guyanese community as it relates to education. I think in the East Indian community there's still a level of communal instinct that is there that helps in the community, but I think that has really been lost in the African Guyanese community.
But if you're going to look at education in any objective way, there are certain things that you have to look at. You have to look at the curriculum that they're dealing with, these children are being given. You have to look at the facilities,
yes,
that are available to our students. You also have to look at the personnel who are imparting this knowledge to our children. And in the African communities, what you find is that many of the schools are basically what you call primary tops, well, the old community high schools, and that has a historical context in that when the private schools were, county high school and so on, the black villages were the primary movers of education after slavery and 1950s coming down. But in 1976 you had the passing of a law which abolished private education, and so you had free education throughout the country. And many of the private schools in those communities, like the county high school in Buxton, which had a very high standard. You had in Buxton had how many? Three private schools.
Three high schools.
Three high schools.
Right. Two private and a public.
Right. And then you had the schools that were connected to the church. Right. Now those church schools were not very large schools, but in essence, except for those in Georgetown, like St. Rose's and the Bishop's High School and St. Stanislaus and so on. But in the communities, you had pretty small buildings, and most of them were primary schools. So what happened was that they were converted to community high schools. The community high schools, the concept of a community high school was a noble one. It was supposed to be addressing the needs of children who are not so academically inclined, and so they were to be given the basic reading, writing, computation skills and so on, but the focus would have been on chartering them through a course of technical training. So those schools were outfitted with all of the equipment, the tools and everything, all right, that would have given those children the opportunities, replacing the trade schools that used to exist in the village, right? But they also had the opportunity, if they were performing well, to write what was called the SSPE examination. And if they did part 1 and part 2, then they could have gone back into the normal secondary school and would have written CXC. But because of the time and the situation, the stringent, the economic conditions, people basically vandalized all the stuff in the schools. They never really took off the ground as they should have. And so what you found with a drain of people began to leave, that the schools eventually turned out to be places where people simply went to school. They hadn't good teachers, they hadn't the equipment, they hadn't the tools. And so since that period from the 1980s right up to maybe 2 or 3 years ago, we've had children simply going to school but not learning anything. So we have a pool of people out there in the black communities, because most of these schools are in black communities. And so you have a plethora of young men and women who went there and who did not get an education. Now, that the effect of that would have been something that would have been passed on to their children and their because, but we get a sense now that many people in the African communities are once again seeing an interest in education. The problem now is that the children themselves are the problem, because they are now the ones that you have to work with to get them to understand that, hey, your parents are making a sacrifice. You need to really pull yourself together, because in the schools they're the ones who create a lot of the problems. They gamble, they fight. The Indians have their problems. They ride minibuses, they make love in the classroom all day. Every society has problems that are peculiar to them. But in the African, because you say they're assertive, yes, right? They're more willing to challenge you, and yes, you have to deal with them on a daily basis and try to get them to understand that the reason for being in school is for education. Yes. And I think that is one of the major problems that we have, apart from the fact that some parents still are not focused on getting their children to school and keeping them in school. Those who are, the children themselves, seem to be a problem. All right? So how do we address that?
To add to what you said,
sure.
Parents, on the whole, parents, you have to revitalize yourself, as you said clearly. The parents, they are realizing the value of education, but how do we instill it in our children? You have to sit down with your children. If you're working, you have to try and find that time. Yes, it is important, so because you realize it is important, you need to give it time. You need to tell your children, listen, I didn't have an education and I want you to have the education. I'm willing to make the sacrifice to get all of us out of this situation, because education will propel us out of the poverty. Education will propel us out of the situation that we're in right now. And if I can't help you, I will try and go to any avenue, legally of course, to assist and to help you. If you can't do it, you have a neighbor in the community who can do it. You have somebody, another teacher probably down the street who can do it. You have a nurse down the street who can do it. So there are people out there who can help you. So don't ever sit back and say, okay, because I don't know, or I can't help myself, or I can't help my child with the work, because it is true. The new content that is being given to the students, yes, some of the parents are not au fait with it, and that is no reason for you to lay back and be, well, I don't understand this work, and you have to worry or you have to seek help and so on. You be proactive. You go out with that child. Let that child see that, okay, mommy can't read, but mommy is being proactive, and probably it's a good thing. And I'm realizing this good thing, that it's really good, because mommy wouldn't give me the emphasis. Mommy wouldn't push if it wasn't good. And from that child would start to be empowered and start to feel good. Well, it's a good thing, and let me continue. And from that child would realize or have a value. Okay, I should value this thing that mommy's putting so much emphasis on. Also, as teachers, we should be even more proactive. We're noticing children in our community, not just myself, other intellectual persons in the community. If you realize, well, a child is not going to school, just don't sit back and let that child go and say, oh no. Be proactive. You go out, find out why that child is not going to school. If you can help in whatever way you can do it, and that is making a difference, that is aiding and helping that child to come out of that poverty-stricken world that they're in. So that is one way we can help the child.
You know, one of the things that we need to deal with, if we're going to focus on, because you're talking about a large percentage of young people who are basically, they need special attention. And if you're dealing with people who need special attention, then you have to put certain things in place that would help them in that regard. You have to get specialist teachers. All right, you have to be able to broaden the curriculum so that it will give them the scope to be able to channel their energies in a direction, not necessarily in math and English and so on. For instance, my own children, I exposed them. I bought musical equipment. And they can play the guitar, they can play the drum. If they didn't do well at school, they fell back to the music. Right, but in the schools you don't have music. They're not learning a lot of the crafts that they would have learned. Many of the things that they can channel their energies in, and then you have to look at the skill base of the teachers. Many of the teachers in those schools that need really experienced people who can sit and counsel the children, they are not there. They're young teachers who are just out of college, who themselves possibly need guidance, right? And you're putting them to deal with difficult children, right? Yeah. And so that's a problem, all right?
Elsie, one thing before you move off of this, and I think one of the things that we're lacking in the black community, I don't know the extent in other communities because I don't visit those communities and don't know them as well, but certainly the black community, is the absence of role models, the absence of people who have done well educationally, living in the community, interacting with the young people. Because it's not just in school. I mean, if a child is difficult to deal with in school, but that child looks around and sees in the community other educated people who are in the community and are doing things, it makes a difference. And I think there's been a breakdown. First of all, there is a brain drain from the country, but that brain drain affects the African Guyanese villages disproportionately. Let me give you an example. I mean, I was supposed to have spoken in Maikoni today at a community meeting, and one of the primary schools in Buxton had their graduation today, and they asked me if I can come and do the charge. And I told Maikoni, can you postpone the meeting to next week, because I felt it was very important for somebody like myself coming from that village to go there and to talk to those children as they head to high school. No, none of the children there got bishops and queens and the big school. But I was able to say to them, look, I was in your place decades ago. I didn't go to bishops and queens. Right? I went to one of the schools in the village, Bladenall and Buxton Secondary, and today here I am. So I was able to use my own personal experience to say to them, don't be down because you didn't get to Queens. Don't believe this is a barrier. And as I was saying, it occurred to me that if a lot of that is said to the young people more and more and more and more, then it could make a difference. So, yes, people leave the villages for opportunities. People leave the villages to live different places because they've risen on the social ladder and so forth. But I think we can go back into those communities and spend time in the communities and spend time with the children. I'm here, quite a lot and so forth, and I would welcome invitations to go and take a class in a school. I mean, I can't barge in and say I want to do it, but I welcome not just Buxton where I'm from, but wherever, because I think it's not so much the class that I would take, but the presence of somebody like myself in a classroom with little children in there, I think could make a difference.
Okay, let's talk about teachers. The responsibilities of these teachers. I think one of the responsibilities would be to be role models, and you mentioned that teachers should be proactive and go out into the communities. But what else can teachers do to help the situation? Because there are some teachers that think that, okay, I come to school from 8 to 2 or 3 o'clock, and I've done my part. But what else do you think are the responsibilities of teachers? Does it go beyond that 8 to...
No, teachers are human beings, and the fact is that the way that teachers are dealt with has a lot to do with the way teachers respond to their charges. And we have had governments that really did not see the importance of teachers. You have a minister of education who would stand up and say that, when you're coming in this job, that you didn't get in a big salary, so you can't complain about it now. Go and teach your people. And it's Manik Chan I'm talking about. And this is a kind of response. Now, when you talk to teachers like that, then you are demoralizing them. You are simply saying to them that you are not really, to give your best, that they must give exactly what they're receiving. All right? And the demoralization of teachers in this country, in a significant way, would have contributed to the degeneration in the educational system. Teachers have to begin to understand that the children that come to them are not other people's children per se, but they are part of their own experiences, and whatever they become is because of what the teacher would have made them. Alright, so we have to take responsibility for the children who are in our hands, and we need to talk to them more and to understand them better, and to guide them in the direction that they're going to choose. And to a significant degree, you may be able to reach not everybody, but if you do more talking to children, you can get across to them. We don't have guidance teachers, we don't have counselors in schools, but we need those. In Buxton, we are now running a program called the Young Visionaries, dealing with children who are not performing pretty well in school. And you bring them every Friday afternoon. You're not there to teach them to add and to count and so on. What you're doing is building their self-esteem, creating in them the awareness that they have some worth, that they can make it, that they're developing self-pride. And the results from the head teacher of one of the schools that we have taken those children from is that she has seen significant improvement in their performances. So children come from homes, they have problems, they're demoralized because they're not eating well. But once you can get them to that level, if you work on their character, their belief in themselves, you can really change them in many ways. All right?
Do you have anything to add, Delicia and David?
To add to what he said, it is true that teachers do play an active role in children's life. As a teacher, I think it would benefit you to have a knowledge based in social work. It would enable you to not just see your students as students, but to know that they're coming to you with different problems. keeping that in mind, you would be better able to help that child and not just look at that child, okay, well, this child is just being wayward and so forth. Yes, I agree that we should have sit-downs with children. I would do that in my classroom, and I'm putting this out there. Let teachers do that. Take time to get to know your children. Some children, they'll be more open to you. And then being open, they'll be more receptive. They'll be more receptive to learning also. Because if you were very withdrawn from them, they just look at you as being a teacher per se. Like one of my students said to me, "Miss, you don't go home, you stay here all day." I was like, "No, sweetie, teacher go home, and teacher also do the same thing like your mommy, what your mommy does at home." So some of the children, their perception of a teacher is just to teach, and teacher is just marginalized in their mind. Teacher is just here to teach, and if teacher speaks to me very sternly, teacher doesn't like me, and they go with that perception. But as a teacher, yes, you have to be stern, you have to be rigid with them, but also you have to be firm and friendly. They have to be able to come to you and say, "Well, miss, you know what, this is bothering me." And you as a teacher, not just shun them aside, speak to them, listen to their needs. And in that way, you develop a relationship with that child. And that might be the only relationship that child might have, because there is no father figure in the home to see, or their parents, they're both working, and when they go home, they just see a big brother, big sister who's busy with homework, and they're just left alone, no guidance. So as a teacher, you have to be equipped to realize these things. When a child acts out, you have to realize, okay, probably there's a need or there's a reason why this child is doing so. Don't just shun that child.
Okay, you finished? No, but one of the things that happens there, one teacher's experience with a child
changes.
Causes other teachers to view that child in a particular way.
Sure.
So a teacher comes in, this fire is giving problems. You have never encountered this child,
and
but you have that perception of this child, and you begin to treat the child. So you were going there to correct him with a big stick. But what you have to do is to try to understand, because in my own experiences, some of these very children that they see are so bad. When you get close to these kids, you understand that, all they need is somebody who can sit down, talk with them, interact with them, and they can change. Yeah. All right? So you can't make
one person's experience
be your experience,
the defining factor of what you do.
For what that child is.
I would say two things.
Sure.
That that teachers, we need to do as regard teachers. First, I would say that teachers have to understand their communities.
Sure.
I mean, you go to teach in Plaisance. You have to understand Plaisance. You have to understand something about Plaisance, because the children, they are coming out of particular circumstances. And not just understand Plaisance, but understand Plaisance over the line, as opposed to Plaisance or over the road, and so on. So you have to understand something of the sociology. I think that our teachers need to do that. And the second thing I would say, that in the training of the teachers, I think we have to have a modular component of what I call social conscience, social justice. That is, that you're a teacher, but you understand something larger than just teaching. You understand the nature of the society. You understand the imperatives of the society. You understand that as a teacher, that you are not teaching just to read and write, but you are there to do some social engineering, if you will. So I think that and I hear Deon, I think that one of the things that we have to do almost immediately is to raise the salaries of teachers. It's pitiful what teachers are. Teachers all over the world don't get paid well, but in Guyana, it's the worst of the worst. So I think that we need to do that. But I think in exchange, the teachers also have to have a social conscience, and to know that you're not just teaching that individual child, but you're also building a community. You're also lifting up a community, and in the final analysis, lifting that country up. So I think somewhere in the training of the teachers, we have to make that whole notion of the larger responsibility, larger social responsibility of the educator, and also to alert our teachers that when you go into a community to teach, that you understand the nature of that community. What are villages? I think something like that teachers at the training college should learn what is a village, because a village is a unique space with unique peculiarities. Now there are different villages, but there's some basic common things about village that if you go into village to teach that you should know. If you don't know that, then you won't know the children that are coming before you, and you may well misteach them or misunderstand them.
But apart from that, you want to ask?
Yes,
me?
just
Okay.
because we're almost out of time.
Yeah, that's
so
why
you spoke about social consciousness, and Cuffy 250 preaches social pride and consciousness. But let me engage you on this, Deon. How would the teacher go about teaching social pride and consciousness? Because there's different ethnic groups within the classroom, as well as the teacher might be a different ethnic group. How does the teacher go about teaching this?
You're talking with children, you know. I mean, it depends on how you interact a lot with kids. Children come to you, they tell you that this teacher don't like black people. I say, why do you say that? Simply because the teacher is trying to correct them, to get them to do things right. They believe that you're racist. So what you have to do is to get them to understand that the reason why you're behaving this way is because they are the reason. All right? Get them to, because our children are problems. We cannot take away from the fact that we're dealing with people who are themselves problematic. And the point I was going to make is that we have to focus on the children, because we can't talk about the teachers. We also have to talk about the parents. We also have to talk about the children. And they have to come to a point where they realize that this is not about the teacher, whether the teacher like you or not. It's about what you are in school for. And if you understand the purpose, the reason for being there, that is why we have to preach to them all the time that, look, going to school is a sacrifice. If your parents would put up every day the sums of monies they have to take to pay for your transportation, to buy your meals, to buy your books, they can build a house, they can buy a car, they can do so many things for themselves, but they are investing in you. And many of them don't have that understanding. You know, they believe that it's an obligation, that you got to do it so that they can go.
Well, this is where Cuffy 250's work comes in, because you guys in the classroom have to deal with that individual child. But I think the community has to send a particular quality of child to you. And I think that if we restore the notion of pride and dignity among our people, it goes down from parents to children. And so when the child comes to school, the child comes to school with much more confidence and much more awareness, much more appreciation for education. You see? So the problems that we have in the school, a large part of those problems are problems in the community. That if we solve a lot of the problems in the community, if we put a dent in it, then we're able to send a particular type of child to the school. And then if the school puts out a particular type of child, then you're putting out a particular type of parent, and it has the overall effect. And so our work in Cuffy 250 in shooting pride and dignity and so in the community, I think could in the long run have a direct effect on the quality of child that goes into the school. But Delicia,
sure, go ahead.
Like I was going to say, continue on Mr. Deon's point, that yes, as a teacher, you do play a role and a part in the child's education system. Parents need to be more active and instill in the child the value system. And parents, teachers, and the child are supposed to have a relationship. And once that relationship is built between the parent and the teacher, the child will see that. Because in schools, what you find the parents who come to school and interact with that teacher, their children do better. And you wonder why. But when you look back at the reason, that child knows, well, okay, probably every Friday my parents come to school, so I have to get my work done. I have to behave in a certain manner, or else my parent would know. Compared to the parents who don't visit the school, because why? They're working and there are other issues that we understand.
But some parents are children themselves,
True.
right? So the problem is large. I mean, I take your point as a teacher. the parent, but that parent comes out of a particular community.
Yes, and
right.
that's why we need to
And I think we have to always bear that in mind as teachers. There's some parents, without defending others, some parents literally
our children.
and some of them cannot deal with that. So the problem, I would think, is a multifaceted problem, and it has to, you talk about the teachers, the parents, the children, that's your community.
Yes.
And I go back to it, that we in the black community have not been paying attention to the community aspect of education. Parents expect the teachers to do it, the teachers expect the parents to do it, the parents expect the children to do it, and we all keep talking about the other. But I think if as a community, all of us sit down and say, let's talk about this problem, then we go a long way. Towards that end, what some of us are doing is trying to get a Minister of Education to go into these communities and to sit down with these communities in the presence of the parents, the children, and the teachers, and let's talk about a new education thrust, starting with the community, and let's see where that would go.
Okay, I'm going to give you the final minute.
Yes, but you know, the thing is that what David said is crucial, because as teachers we have the experience of parents coming to school and saying, me not able, me not know what to do. I try do something for me, not deal with this by or deal with it. They have given up, right? And they expect the teachers to be able to do what they are unable to do. But the fact is that sometimes we need others to intervene in our children's lives, because children sometimes don't listen to their own. So that significant other is important and can make that inroad that the parents sometimes are unable to make.
Okay.
So we have to understand that too.
Okay. Thank you, David, Delicia, and Deon. That's a lot of D's. For being on African Drums and speaking to us about the multifaceted issue within the education system and in its link to the black communities, and how some of these issues can be solved for the betterment of these communities.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, viewers, for staying with us. Before you move away from your television screens, I want to remind you about the State of Black African Guyanese Forum on the 9th of August at 10 a.m. It's at the Critchlow Labour College. Please make special effort to attend. You will hear more information as we get closer to the time about the speakers and the different topics that they'll be discussing. Thank you for staying with us. This has been African Drums, a television organ of the Cuffy 250 Committee, an organization dedicated to the empowerment of the African Guyanese community through education and the encouragement of self-activity. Please like our Facebook page, it's Cuffy 250. Also, subscribe to our YouTube channel, Cuffy 250, and send us an email. We'd love to hear from you and donate to the cause. It's Cuffy250gy@gmail.com. Thank you for staying with us. Please join us next week.